Fáilte Ribh Cork. This is a webinar hosted by Voice for Teachers. My name is Anne McCarthy and I'm a primary school principal. I'm joined by Kenneth McCarthy of the National Principals Forum, and I'm joined by Dr. Mairead de Burca and Jana Lyons from Glór. Jana, would you like to give us an update on the Change.org petition, please?
Sure, Anne. So I'm sure everybody is aware, we made a Change.org petition yesterday afternoon. It was quite a rushed action because we were under time pressure as the CEC were meeting, and we wanted to make sure that they got the message loud and clear from their members. If it was the members' wish that we end up getting a directive on health and safety grounds for COVID. We were delighted that by the end of the day it had 5,000 signatures, which is far more than we ever anticipated that it would get. It's still there for people to sign. We would urge that this is only for INTO members. We did see some SNAs signing it in solidarity, but it's for our union executive. So we would encourage other trade unionists to set up similar if they need it for their own sector. Now, while we did get the news that the opening of the special schools and special settings is postponed, that doesn't mean that our activism ends here. It just means that we have a little bit of breathing room. And I would not be surprised if we come up against a similar situation between now and the time that the pandemic is over. So it is very important that INTO members continue to communicate with their leadership that we do need to ballot for this directive. And the appropriate manner to do that would be, again, by emailing or texting your CEC rep, and also by bringing it up at your January AGM, which is being held online this year. And I'll have more details about that at the end.
Thanks, Jana. Kenneth, would you tell us a little bit about the National Principals Forum, please?
Hi, Anne. Thank you. Yeah, I'm a school principal for the past 16 years. I'm also a member of the admin group of the National Principals Forum. The National Principals Forum is a grassroots lobby group set up in May 2018. And I suppose we established ourselves because we'd seen the problems that exist in the education system, many problems that we try and bring forward to ministers and the government without any, nobody hearing us. So we established it as I said, as a lobby group. We work collectively as principals to seek better supports for our schools, and in particular for our special needs pupils. I suppose since we were established in May 2018, we've tried to meet with 3 ministers, and not only have they, I suppose, failed to engage with us, they've failed to acknowledge any of our correspondences, which is quite upsetting. I suppose, given in light too of what Minister Foley says, that she's there, she's listening to us and all this, but we're the people on the ground that she's constantly ignoring. And I suppose, look, we are where we are now, I suppose, because because we aren't being heard.
Thanks, Kenneth. Thank you. And Jana, would you like to give an introduction on Glór, please? Some people may not be familiar with Glór.
Yeah, no problem. So we had this in our previous webinars, but we are aware that we might have some people tuning in for the first time today. So if we just go to the Glór slide, basically we set up in 2017. Everyone within our grassroots group are active INTO members, and we're obviously working in a personal capacity in our spare time to I suppose to further the engagement of INTO members with their union, because we found that a lot of our colleagues in school wanted to get involved, but they didn't know how. They found all of the formal processes quite difficult, and I suppose some of them just needed a push in the right direction. So yeah, like you need to be involved with the union if you want to see changes in it. And obviously there have been times where all of us, and I'm sure every INTO member or any trade union member, has been maybe frustrated with their trade union, but you can't shout from the sidelines. The only way that you're actually going to make change is by getting actively involved and rolling your sleeves up.
Thanks, Jana. Kenneth, have you a statement from the National Principals Forum in response to the DES?
I do, Anne. Yeah, thank you. We met up this morning online, and I suppose we called it the mirage of consultation in light of what Minister and the Department of Education published last night as their statement. And it goes as follows: mirage of consultation. Last night, Ministers Norma Foley and Josepha Madigan issued a statement from their department that gave the illusion that the unions Forza and the INTO did not cooperate in the discussions on reopening schools safely. In reality, however, the unions are acting upon the deep-rooted concerns their members have articulated, which the department have consistently not addressed. On the Department of Education webinar last Monday evening, Deputy Chief Medical Officer Dr. Ronan Glynn reaffirmed what all acknowledged, that is, the need to get our most vulnerable pupils back to school, but also intimated that now is not the right time, as the numbers in our hospitals are just too high. The World Health Organization also hold a clear position that schools should remain closed when the community transmission is high. What we have witnessed from the government is politics of division, an attempt to drive a wedge between parents and school personnel, unions and members, the general public, and teachers and special needs assistants. The National Principals Forum remains committed to supporting all our children, especially those with special education needs, their parents and families. We will continue to do everything we can for our children in the face of chronic under-resourcing, lack of understanding or support from the department. We as a group acknowledge that school personnel always work in the best interest of our pupils. The National Principals Forum is asking once again that the Minister for Education and her department engages with our group, who are on the ground tasked with implementing any directives to get our schools open safely at the appropriate time. And it ends there, Anne.
Thanks, Kenneth, and hopefully the ministers will listen. Thank you. Marie, have you a statement, a Glór response to Des?
I do, Anne. Thank you very much. So this is the second letter written by the education ministers that blames school staff and unions for schools not reopening, instead of accepting that the ministers' lack of planning is the real reason. As a group of teachers, we do our very best every day for the families in our school communities. We felt obliged to correct the falsehoods published by the Department of Education very late yesterday evening. We are trained professionals who know our own schools and contexts best. There's an important lesson to be learned on how the department chose to respond to union members' safety concerns yesterday. The right to join a trade union and organise for your rights is enshrined in law. We will be respectful and assertive as always, but we will not allow our professionalism or intentions to be called into question. School staff cannot be blamed. We are entitled to a safe workplace and to demand safety for our pupils. We're not the ones who have ignored public health advice like the ministers claimed. We didn't criticise the CMO or open up the country in December. No, we heard NEFIT CMO telling everyone to stay at home, to work from home, and we're trying to implement health advice. The message I want to give you all today is that school staff love our pupils. We really do. We do our very best for them every day, and while other supports have stopped, we continue to support our pupils. We will be so happy to reopen our school buildings once it's actually safe to do so. That is, once community transmission is low. But until then, we'll continue to support them remotely every day. The minister's correspondence from yesterday made mention of their webinar many times. Let's talk about that webinar. School staff requested direct communication with health advisors, and so a webinar was arranged. The webinar was supposed to allay the fears of school staff, but the adults in schools were barely mentioned at that webinar. The doctors presented data that was out of date. The claim that schools are safe was repeated. School staff simply do not believe that schools are safe. Our eyes tell us a different story. The mantra that schools are safe does not stand up to scrutiny. As already mentioned by Kenneth, Deputy CMO Dr. Ronan Glynn left the audience under no illusion that now is not the time, just yet, to reopen schools, because numbers in the community and in our hospitals and our ICUs are just too high. And as Kenneth also said, who are very clear, the World Health Organization, that schools are only safe to reopen when community transmission is low. The community transmission in Ireland is very high at the moment. Therefore, it is illogical to open schools. We're experiencing very high rates of COVID in our community. We had a school-based case here in our home, here where I am. The teacher was not deemed to be a close contact of the positive case. However, she subsequently developed symptoms and was sent for her own test by her GP. The test was positive. It's just not right that teachers are seldom deemed to be close contacts. So that's what we see every day. That's why we don't believe that schools are safe. At the end of the webinar, the presenter thanked participants for all of the positive comments. There were no positive comments. There were thousands of very frightened and negative comments from staff and families across the country. The participants' fears were not eased by that webinar. So when can we reopen? We cannot reopen when community transmission is so high. Schools are not the magical, safe places that parents have been led to believe they are. The issues we as teachers and SNAs and other school staff presented to the government during the summer of 2019 are still our issues. Look at them. Primary schools. So people think that schools are safe. Certainly school buildings are safe, but when people are in the building, schools are not safe. Let's look at this reality. So look at this chart. In May and June, we asked for these things, and in September, when we went back, were they in place or were they not? And are they in place now? So 2 meter social distancing. Did we have them in September? Not really, no. In most schools we didn't. And we were told by the department that they weren't even necessary for junior infants up to 2nd class. Do we have social distancing now? No, we don't. Masks for teachers, we were told in September that visors would be fine. Now that's been revised and masks are seen to be important, but most school staff buy their own, even now. Do we have smaller class size? No, we still don't. And we have the largest class size in the entire EU at primary. Do we have ventilation systems? We didn't and we don't. Do we test all possible cases? Still no. Do we test all possible close contacts? We didn't then, and I'm not sure that close contacts are being tested at all now, such as the need for testing. I don't know. Are class staff considered to be close contacts? Seldom then, and I don't see any change. So are class cases, are school cases considered to be school cases or community cases? They seldom were then, as we experienced, and I don't think there's been any change. Were staff tested before we returned in September? No, and we still won't be. What about pupils? No, still not. Will there be regular testing in all schools like we have in nursing homes? No, and still no. Will we even have 1 meter social distancing? Very doubtful. We didn't, and there's no change. Sometimes there isn't even an inch of social distancing. Will we have masks for pupils? We didn't, and we still have no talk about it. Will our PPE grant cover all the PPE that's needed? It didn't. So many staff members had to buy their own, and it wasn't the school's fault. And now there's a 40% cut to the PPE grant. Cleaning grant, would it cover all the cleaning that was needed? No. Lots of teachers and SNAs had to do lots of cleaning, and there's no change. Did we get temporary extra teachers or SNAs substitutes to help us? No, we got some supplementary panels, and some schools had access to those, but not all. And the ones who did had to share that 1 substitute with maybe 24 schools. And there's a substitute shortage nationwide. The same with SNAs. Do we have vaccination for staff in September? Well, it didn't exist then. And do we now? We're 11th out of 15 on the priority list, and they've refused to put us up. Not that we want to jump over any other people, but that's the reality. Will we get the vaccine for staff before we return to school? Nobody says we will. So come on, let's call a spade a spade. Pods and bubbles can't keep anyone safe. Pods are tables where the children always sat. There's no change there since September or since last September 2018. Bubbles are simply their class. So the bubble is 2nd class, 5th class, no change. The department's reopening plan for September 2020 was based on the false premise that the virus is not airborne. Remember, the virus is not airborne, they wrote. Safety is an illusion, a myth under the current plan. We need all of those X's in that chart to be ticks. One solution to ensure that schools could reopen is to vaccinate all staff straight away. We could then return to school safely. However, as I said, we do not want to leapfrog over other groups in urgent need of the vaccine. Therefore, the other choice is to keep schools closed, maintain distance learning until community transmission is much, much lower. School staffs worked very hard to reopen schools in September, many working throughout the month of August to ensure a safe return to school. School staff have done all of the work and are standing up with integrity to keep their school communities safe now. The ministers are very wrong to blame us and to try to make us look bad. The ministers are very wrong to cause such anxiety to entire school communities. It's just wrong. We're trying to survive a pandemic. Safety has to be number one. In future, these ministers should not announce that schools will reopen until they have their agreement from the school staff and until they provide the outstanding elements outlined in our chart, which you can see on the screen. Are we happy that we're not reopening on Thursday? Happy is the wrong word. We're not happy, but we're very relieved. We're relieved for our own health and our lives, but most of all, we're very relieved for the children we teach. We're relieved that reopening too early will not now cause any of them to become sick or die, or to transmit this deadly virus to someone else. We're relieved that we can continue to teach all of our wonderful pupils online, not just some of them in school. We're relieved that we were able to sleep last night for the first time in over a week. However, reading the minister's inappropriate, unproductive, and simply untrue statement shows us clearly that this fight for our pupils to have a safe learning environment and for our school staff to have a safe working environment is by no means over. The plan to reopen schools was announced without any thought to the massive logistics involved or the knock-on effect this would have on pupils who remain learning from home. Proper and meaningful consultations must be made with principals, teachers, SNAs, ancillary staff, and transport teams who have the insight and experience to highlight what is needed for a successful, safe, effective, and long-term opening for our pupils. In future, these ministers should not announce the schools will reopen until they have agreement from school staff and until they provide the outstanding elements outlined in our chart. There are a number of elements which must be considered for a safe opening to take place. Both the educational needs of all children in the school and safety must be supported. At the end of the day, we must remember that we are all ruled by this terrible pandemic. If community transmission is high, then our children are safest learning at home. Thank you, Anne.
Right, thank you. That's very comprehensive. Jana, would you like to give us a bit more about our call to action, please?
Yeah, so yesterday we asked for people to contact the CEC reps, and today on foot of the very, very disappointing, actually disgraceful response from the Department of Education last night. It's not acceptable for the Department of Education to make the comments that they did about educators when we are keeping our community's best interests at heart. And we, as workers, we have the right to a safe working environment. So, you know, I know that people tend to send messages to the Minister for Education, but actually it's much more effective to make contact with your local TD, because if they hear that you are a constituent and if they think possibly that there's a vote on the line in the next election, they're much more likely to put pressure on. So we all know whoismytd.com. If you put in your home address there, it will bring up who your county councillors are and also who your local TDs are. And if we just go to the next slide, these are some things that you might include in your email. So it's very important from the outset to make them know that you are a constituent of theirs and also that you're working in a school. As with our messages that we were encouraging people to send to the CEC reps, there's no point in doing a copy and paste email. It needs to be short, sweet, to the point and personalized. And the main point that you want to make with them is that it is unacceptable of the Department of Education to attempt to sow division between our communities. we're all part of the school community and we are all on the same side, and pitting school staff against families, that's not what we see every day in our schools. We all work together and it's just not acceptable. We're just not standing for it. The community relations and trust are now being affected, and it's affecting the relationships that we have with our communities. It would be important for any party or independent TD, you urge them to bring this up in the Dáil, and particularly because Norma Foley is a Fianna Fáil TD, if you have Fianna Fáil TDs in your local area, urge them to bring it up at a party meeting, at a Fianna Fáil party meeting. And if I can just continue there, we're
Yes.
kind of going to the wrap up now. So our next steps and our closure for this. So as I said earlier, INTO members still need to put pressure on our leadership for a ballot to allow us to work from home for health and safety reasons during this pandemic. Just because schools aren't reopening tomorrow on Thursday does not mean that we're out of the woods. We need to be proactive now, get that ballot to members. Ideally, that could be done at the same time as the upcoming online ballot for the incoming pay deal. You need to make sure that you have your email address registered on the INTO website, because a secure email link for your vote will be sent to that. I think anyone who had an aircom.net email address might need to double check that INTO have a correct email address. Last I heard, they have email addresses for approximately 80% of their membership, and of course it's really important that people use that vote, but we need to have a vote on health and safety grounds. That's what the ASTI did in October, November. That's how they were able to instruct their members to work from home. Continue the momentum of the change.org petition, but don't rely on it. There are other ways to skin a cat, and there's other actions that we need to take. Okay, so take that as a boost of momentum, but it's not the end goal. The January AGMs for INTO are this month. They're all being held online. The URL is not up on the INTO website for security reasons. You have to receive it from your branch secretary. Some branch secretaries are only sending it via staff reps. Ideally, really, all branch secretaries should be using their access to the database, I think, in my personal opinion, to send that invite to every branch member. If you have not received it yet, make contact with your branch secretary or with your staff rep. They should have received it on your behalf. You also could submit a motion for January AGMs. That's on the next slide, and we'll leave that up on the screen when the webinar finishes. And as we have driven home at our previous webinars, and we always do, the whole core of trade union activity is that we stand together even if we are not affected. An injury to one is an injury to all. And again, the central message is that our schools are only as safe as the communities they serve. So I'll finish with this on the final slide. This will stay up on the screen, and it has suggested wording for you to send to your AGM. Now, the January AGM is when members can submit motions for annual Congress, which instructs the CEC on their union work for the following year, whereas any quarterly meeting can propose and pass a motion stating that branch's stance on something. This would be important to put in under any other business. This is not a Congress motion. This is a motion so that your branch officers can communicate the views of your branch as a whole on this topic. So the wording would be, Dear Branch Secretary, I would like this motion to be placed on the AGM agenda under any other business. Name of branch demands that the CEC ballot its members for a directive not to attend school and continue remote learning or remote teaching whenever deemed necessary for the duration of the COVID-19 pandemic. And obviously word of mouth is really important. WhatsApp, Twitter, Facebook, whatever you're using. Thanks, Anne.
Thanks very much, Jana. That was great advice. Can I say to those of you listening, Míle buíochas for joining us. There's plenty to think about. Please do be involved with the union and have your voice heard. Can I say thanks to our presenters here today and to Paul O'Shea, who helped with IT. Please share this with your colleagues on WhatsApp, and most importantly, Fon Slán. So Gura Míle maith agaibh.